all for joining us in what is just the most amazing location I think I've ever done a talk. I specialise in biophilic design, which is all about how we connect people with nature. And so, this is absolutely perfect, isn't it? It smells amazing. Crows could shut up a little bit. But, that's nature, isn't it? You can't really control everything. So, welcome to the third of our Planted Countries Save Our Soils talk in partnership with the National Trust here at Stourhead and filmed on the deck of our beautiful off-the-grid cabin made by Out of the Valley. My name's Oliver Heath and I am the biophilic designer for and advisor for Planted, the only design event aimed at reconnecting people, spaces and nature. At Planted, we wanted to make the commercial case for taking a nature-first approach to design in all aspects of our lives to create a cleaner, greener and more sustainable future. In this series of talks, we're exploring why the earth is so important to food, farming and nature, and asking what role design has to play in encouraging the use of local materials while reducing the demand for already overstretched natural resources. Today, we're discussing with this fantastic panel the subject of designing with nature in mind. Everything we make, use and dispose of has an environmental impact, and it's a subject that we're becoming increasingly aware of. That it's not just the embedded carbon, but also the in-use carbon of the products that make a difference. But how does that affect the look and the feel, the design of the products that we create? Where once design styles were international movements, we're now looking around us much more for design inspiration. A new generation, motivated by environmental concerns and dwindling skills, are looking to their local environments for inspiration, from surplus timber to rammed earth, weaving willow to earthenware bricks. Local resource mapping is becoming a hot topic and very much part of a designer's aspirations to reconnect spaces with nature and local environments. But how realistic is it to switch from international to local supply chains? And is it really the best way to minimize and reduce the environmental impact of the products and the materials we use in the buildings that we create and that are so important in our lives? So here today to discuss that is an inspirational lineup of speakers, makers and manufacturers who know this industry inside out. So we have Paul Zwart from another country, Samantha Bunyan from Cecence and Bill Amberg from Bill Amberg Studio. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers to talk for 5 to 7 minutes about their background, their introduction to the industry, their passions, and their interests, and then we're going to enter into a panel discussion, and at the end there's going to be 10 to 15 minutes for some questions from you, the audience. So, just in order of I guess that's your left to right. Yep. I'm going to ask Paul. Going the other way. To just tell us a little bit more about your background and your interests.
Well, what a great place and nice to be here in. It's quite hot actually as well. In the sun with my sweater and everything. So another country is 12 years old, set up with a sort of West Country provenance, with the simple aim of creating a sustainable brand in the furniture sector. I think at the time I was looking around what was happening in sort of the furniture space and thinking, there's so many nice things being launched and discussed, but no one is talking about sustainability, provenance, proper storytelling, carbon footprint, and I was quite taken aback by that, and so I set off in a really small manner with no great big plans to set up and design a simple range, a purposely pared down range of furniture, which is still called Series 1 and still to this day happens to be a best-selling collection. And one of my partners runs to this day a workshop in Assembly, a village on the Dorset-Wiltshire coast border. And off we went to create this collection. And the same values and ethos that drove me to set it up at the time drives us to this day. So our values are expressed within every design that we make. Sustainability in terms of supply chain or network, as we've been discussing. The harvesting of the timber being sustainable. Natural fibers, one of our long-standing partners from Natural Mats is in the audience. And since that day we worked with them in really pushing the natural fibers out there as an alternative to foam. And we have since been looking at our own carbon footprint in reducing and then offsetting that footprint. We've embraced well-being since with purpose since maybe 2018, working with a very interesting agency called Ecist, and looking at biodiversity of the sources of our materials, of biofilic design, quality of the air in the space that you live in, and light and all other associated things. So we try to kind of have a holistic approach to our work, and that's kind of what drives the business, And our design is not driven by design; it's driven by expressing that ethos to this day. And I think when it comes to addressing the challenges that we have in terms of supply networks or local manufacture or more long distance manufacture, so many elements come into play. And I think we embrace localism and we maximize localism, but we also need to obviously run a business and look at, I guess, the comparative advantage of working with different suppliers in different parts of the country, or in our case, a European continent. But to this day, as I said, 12 years on, our mission to be good corporate citizens, push the envelope forwards, embrace R&D, embrace new materials, and really be a voice, however small, in this very important conversation we all need to be having about, how do we resolve and how we face up to our challenges today. And as I've been speaking to people on the stand today as well, I can't help but feel that we are all a bit of a nice, purposeful echo chamber. We all tend to sort of, thankfully, agree on sort of basic principles of what needs to be done. But the bigger world out there, where change has to be made on scale, is a different proposition. So when I look at what we do and what we're doing, maybe going forward, I always bear in mind that we need to be able to, or have the opportunity and the potential to grow and thus affect more change. So we look at things from all those angles, and that still drives me today.
Great. Thank you. Sam.
Yes, hi. It's very hot. we were saying earlier, I don't know whether to keep my jacket on or off, but Jake's told me I can't take my jacket off, so I'm going to do my best. So I'm part of a company called Cecence, a Wiltshire, Hampshire-based company. It's on the border of both counties, so for today we'll call it a Wiltshire-based company. And we set out with a mission to look at the way in which composites were being manufactured, lightweight composite materials, and challenge the concept that everything needed to be made out of carbon or glass fiber and epoxy resin systems or phenolic resin systems. But also, we wanted to find a way to produce at scale, as Paul was just talking about, but not just by buying big robots and crazily expensive bits of equipment, but to really look at how we could de-skill the process of composite manufacturing and make it something that we could easily train up people to do, pull people from other sectors and train them up in a matter of months to become the composite technicians of the future. But we were always aware, working in aerospace and the rail industry, that we were working with carbon fiber products and epoxy resin systems, and we wanted to change that. But we were being driven down a route of making everything as lightweight as possible to save on fuel burn in aeroplanes, and in that respect we were saving on the CO2, but I was always conscious of the fact that there must be a better material, a healthier material that we could be working with. And we had the privilege of partnering with a wonderful man, a filmmaker called Steve Barron, who had a vision to grow his own house in Cambridgeshire. And he created a farm called Margent Farm. He grew the hemp, and he used a bio-based resin system and compressed the hemp into corrugated panels. And this was part of a much larger project with Paloma Gormley, a very wonderful activist architect. And those panels, you can go and see them yourself in Cambridge. I think Margent Farm do lots of open days, and I've bought a few bits that we might pass around this gathering today. So the privilege of meeting this man meant that it sort of acted as a kind of trigger point for us to say, okay, let's do it. Let's challenge the fact that we want to move away from carbon fiber, and let's try and work with hemp fibers, and let's do something really crazy like try and get this into an aeroplane. So we're still on that crazy journey. And if you come to our table, you'll see some kind of mouldings of a meal table project that I worked on last year to develop a hemp fibre bioresin meal tray for aeroplanes. But our real passion and interest is in making stuff using hemp, because hemp is the most wonderful fibre. It sequesters CO2, and its growth is much quicker to grow than forestry, and it offers a huge opportunity. And when we set up Cecence, our methodology was very much about low energy and compression moulding rather than autoclaving. So we already had a kind of way of manufacturing in as eco-friendly a way with as limited amount of waste as possible. But the materials we were using were one of the things that we wanted to challenge. And Oliver wanted me to talk a bit about the fact that my background wasn't really in composite engineering. My background is actually in theatre and illustration. But I think one of the advantages of working in a theatre space is that it allows you to pull together a rather random collective of people and find ways of networking and connecting ideas together in maybe a more free-form style than you might otherwise do if you'd come from a more corporate background. That's my hope. That's what I think works. And, well, you can decide that for yourselves.
Great, and you've got a couple of samples here. Do you want to just pass them around? Because as we're talking, people... can you just tell us what are those products likely to be used for?
So
are they alternatives for traditional products?
Yeah, so the corrugated iron that you might typically, the kind of ubiquitous panelling system that you might find on an industrial or agricultural building, we've swapped that out for a hemp and bioresin fibre. And then the other block that's coming around is an alternative to chipboard, which typically is full of some stuff that is not great. There are no isocyanates in that, for example, and it's structurally better than chipboard. It's somewhere a little bit below marine plyboard, but a lot of interior designers and furniture manufacturers are getting very excited about it as an alternative.
So it doesn't contain any toxins that off gas, like formaldehyde?
No formaldehyde, no isocyanates. You can't eat it, but that's about it.
Right. It smells great, though.
It smells great,
yeah. It smells very nice.
Nobody eat that. You want to back.
Don't eat it.
And Bill.
Oh, well, hello, and welcome everybody to Stour Head. I have a specialist business focusing on leather. The material and all the techniques that surround it. I started the business in 1984, really as a hobby. I was passionate about it as a boy, and I'm still absolutely passionate about it now. I have a studio in London where we work in architecture and in furniture and product design, encompassing lots of different other materials and lots of different other artisanal makers, from woodworking to metalworking to resin and lots of other different materials. But most of our work has a leather element in it in some way or another. And I also live here. I live just literally down the hill. And I have a studio here, so I do a lot of development prototyping here as well. And I'm well linked in with a lot of network of local makers and manufacturers on different scales, and we utilise those characters for different projects that we've got going on all around the world. So it's a very, very varied, bespoke, quite artisanal business, very hands-on, but it's endlessly fascinating. And I think as a material, it's facing some challenges at the moment, but I think those are interesting, and we welcome the conversation.
Thank you. And you've got some materials. Do you want to hold on to
those? I
Or
have. Yeah.
hand them out.
I've got some pieces that we've been recently using, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about. But I'm very passionate about using leathers that are vegetable tanned and not chrome tanned. Materials that historically would have been what we would consider to be real leather. I strongly suggest that you have a good feel of it and get an understanding of it a little bit. This will be used for saddle flanks. It has no surface pigmentation on it. All the grain is a natural grain. There's no printed grain. The last talk here was really interesting, talking about how people expect uniformity, obviously in food and farming. But also materials, people expect materials to be uniform. Well, they're not. Trees don't, no two tree looks the same. No two cow looks the same. Why would you expect leather to be absolutely uniform and monochrome? And that's one of the things that we're really trying to impress and get people to understand more. I've also bought some fibres which are actually quite well represented out there in Natramat, but these are what we use for stuffing and for filling and for upholstery. These are felted wools from wool waste. The middle one is actually, this is Oxfam jumpers. So they're taken up, shredded, and then they're corded and turned into a felt. And this is coir with natural latex. So these are all alternative fills to foam. But please have a
Can I ask you,
pan
with
around
that
and have a
felt
look.
from Oxfam, I mean, is that wool felt? Or is that, I mean, obviously it's going to
These
be a
are
lot
wool.
of
They
Christmas
do wool
jumpers in there.
felts. They take all the denim that isn't used at Oxfam, and they can. This is up in Derbyshire, and they strip it out into fibres and they felt it, and it becomes this wonderful denim felt. And we're using it at the moment. And then they also take all the shirts. They strip all the shirt fibres out and turn that into felt, and that's what all these are. They're just wonderful recyclable, reusing materials. And let's face it, leather is a byproduct. This is a byproduct of the food industry. This would get chucked away, but this makes the most durable and wonderful material.
You're becoming today's assistant, aren't you?
Yes, I'm sorry about handing it all to you in that way.
I did say we weren't going to pick on you.
Why don't we
Looks
hand
like
that
she's
around
quite
as well?
enjoying it.
It's lovely, isn't it? Yeah, we'll have a good feel of it. It's got a good texture.
Okay, so just want to kind of like, are you done?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay,
yes.
sorry.
I think so.
I was just thinking my clock there. Yeah, you're done. Good. Okay, so I just kind of like work out where we're at right now. How bad is the situation in the furniture and materials industry, and how do we measure that? You know, Paul, I know that you've done a lot of investigation into the materials and the products. What is it that, what kind of makes up the carbon footprint of the furniture that you create?
Yeah, so we've been spending the last couple of years trying to measure both our corporate carbon footprint as well as our average product carbon footprint. That's quite tricky because every product is a bit different. Some are made entirely of timber, some have some metal elements. Different timbers from different parts of the world or Europe have different carbon footprints and so forth. So we created a composite product, which we don't make, but has a bit of ash and walnut and oak and brass and then we measured the waxes that we apply to our furniture and or clear lacquer sometimes. And then went through with all of the calculations with a partner called Climate Partner. But everything's energy input, labor units, and also following and doing so in line with the UN greenhouse emissions protocol, which is quite different from just coming up with a figure and perhaps deducting the embedded carbon in wood from that figure, for example. You can't do that. So the 100-year lifespan that a building or a product needs to be able to show in order for you to take the carbon that's in the timber out of your footprint or off your footprint. So we offset that without calculating the carbon in the wood. It differs, of course, where you produce, so localism matters a lot with that in mind. For our goods produced in Portugal, which is we produce in the UK, sort of 3 or 4 different workshops for bedding, upholstery, and these chairs. This is my show and tell. I can pass the chair around as well.
So these are
these are my chairs, but I have a spare one I can pass.
Did you know they'd taken your chairs?
Well, I lent him, yes.
Okay, very good.
It was in his contract to take part in this. He wouldn't do it.
I am taking it back though. But again, you probably can see, as Bill was saying, every chair is a bit different. But the grain is different, and every tree is different. But so these are made in the UK. But I think from probably oak sourced from either France or Germany. I think the green oak that you use to bend it back, I think, is English. But so it's an average of UK production, Portugal-based production. The transport from Portugal to the UK is through a carbon-neutral transporter, so it is an important part of this. But in calculating the footprint, and of course, I don't have the figures in my head for the industry as a whole, but we try to operate locally and what I say regionally. So if I had, if we had another country in 5 years' time with a worldwide footprint, I would still be working on a regional basis. I would want to say, okay, North America produces for the North American market, Europe for the European market, and Asia for the Asian market. So this is how we look at our model, although it's not quite that big, but you can obviously hope and think and plan. And so the footprint for our products on average, and things have already evolved since we did this about a year ago. So it's about 60 kilograms of CO2 per this 30 kilogram product. So kind of a 2-to-1 ratio or 1.8 ratio. And the biggest elements in that footprint were packaging was surprisingly high, up to I think 70% of that. We have since, been pressing upon the suppliers to use recycled board, not just recycling. That makes a very big difference. The energy input, is what it is. It's hard to change that, but the factory has now 40% solar power, so that helps a lot. And the grid, as I happen to have learned in Portugal, is about 50% renewable and 50% grey. So that there is improvement in that as well. But if I calculated the carbon content in the timber, then actually the product is carbon neutral out of the box kind of thing. So, but if you take that over a much bigger industry, with non-recyclable packaging, which is often the case, with much longer supply chains, perhaps from Asia, energy input in those factories, mainly from coal-fired plants, particularly in China, the footprint will be much, much higher. And I think another really important thing, however, is kind of take a step back in this and say, okay, whatever we do comes at a cost. Whatever you wear, coming to Stourheads, eating a sandwich, going home, watching the telly, you can't miss it. So you can't say we can't. Whatever we do has a carbon cost. So when it comes to what we do, we take it from the very beginning, where design is really, really, really important to us, because design and longevity is twofold to us. One is, of course, the qualitative longevity. Something has to last because it won't break, it's repairable, and all these good things. But also has to last aesthetically. So we design with what we call with an archetypal shapes in mind. We want things to last so they don't tire in your bedroom or living room. And the combination of the two things, I think, is a really critical first step in setting out, the design of a product. So the carbon footprint is there, but the less you make, the more efficient you make them, the longer they last. These are big contributing factors, to that.
It's quite a complex conversation and investigation, isn't it? Yeah. Sam, what was it that motivated you? You mentioned that there were all these other composites on the market that were wrong, that were going in the wrong direction. What was it that sort of motivated you to find a way to remake them with a nature base?
I think when you're working in a manufacturing environment, you're critically aware of you're aware of your team and your workforce and what materials they're working with. I think a good indicator is if they have to wear gloves and masks and wrap themselves up in a kind of hazmat suit, then probably there's something that needs fixing there. And so that would have been one of the driving factors. Paul and I spoke earlier about, Paul was talking about designing for disassembly, that if you can design something knowing how it's going to be taken apart at end of life, then you're better going to be able to recycle it. And I had the privilege of meeting a wonderful architect many years ago when I was a young woman called Cedric Price, who very much believed and spoke long before everyone is speaking about it now, about the need to, when you design something, think about what's going to happen to it end of life. And in terms of the energy that Paul was talking about, that's obviously a critical factor for us because we use hot compression molding. What we try and do is adapt the resin formulations to make sure that everything we do can be cured at a relatively low temperature and also relatively quickly, so we're using less energy. And someone once gave me quite a good statistic. I think they said that a bottle of Badwa mineral water had a lower carbon footprint sold in an English store than a bottle of Buxton mineral water. And that's primarily because the energy system that's used in the factory, the Badwa factory, is, I think, a nuclear power, energy source. And in Buxton, I'm not sure what it is, but we've learned a lot about how we better use energy. And if we could find a system whereby we didn't use any heat at all, that would be really cool. So we're working on that. We're not quite there yet. Does that answer your question, Oliver?
Yeah. And Bill, you mentioned that there are sort of traditional tanning uses chromium. Is that right? How bad is the traditional leather industry? And what's sort of motivating you to find other ways of not just tackling the materials, but also in the products that you create? Because obviously, a lot of the products you kind of design, you're well known for the bags that you create. There's a sort of level of perfection in there that is expected. But maybe that's contrary to what we really need to be doing if we're going to be mirroring the sort of imperfections of nature.
I think, I guess to answer that, I'd go right back to what first turned me on to using leather in the first place. And I think one of those things, leather is one of those really wonderful materials that gets better the more you use it. It actually improves with age, and it improves with use. And you find something in an attic, or you find an old trunk, or you find an old briefcase or something, and not only is it still intact, it's repairable, which is hugely important. It's wonderful, and you can see the character, you can see the life in the actual material itself. It's kind of taken on board the character and the personality of the person who's been using it. And so it kind of gets imbued with a personality as a material. And that, I think, is quite extraordinary, for any material to be able to do that. But the thing about repairability and durability is really, really important. Leather is the strongest single material yet for upholstery, for instance. There is no stronger material. There are a lot of other materials that are attempting to come close to it. But in terms of tear strength, in terms of wet and dry rub, in terms of permeability, in terms of porosity, they don't touch it in terms of its character. The repairability is really important. You can take an old bag, you can take an old sofa, you can rip it apart, you can turn it back into something else. When you stitch through leather, you don't actually you don't make a hole through the leather. You actually just move the fibers apart. So you can re-stitch leather many times without losing its strength. You're not perforating. It's not like a piece of paper that you perforate that becomes a point of weakness. In fact, you can stitch it countless times. So that kind of the circular economy debate, I think, is front and center in leather as a material. And it's going to work. It works in the reason why it works so well in upholstery, the reason why it works so well in bags and accessories and in belts and shoes. It's because it is so durable, and I think that's one of its key elements. I think that makes it such an exciting material. And then you transpose on top of that what you can link it with in terms of the techniques that you can ally it to, or the additional materials that you can put. I mean, having now seen your resins, I'm dying to see how we can mix those in with leather, because I think, leather is one of those materials that can form and work alongside lots of other components really, really well.
And Sam, you were telling us a little bit about hemp. I mean, obviously this is a material that was enormous in its industry, 100, 200 years ago, and then it got outlawed because of the kind of the
cannabis.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's had quite a history, and now it seems to be having a revival. What do you think? Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why it seems to be having a revival? What are the benefits of growing, making, and using hemp?
I went back to my old school recently and gave a talk and was talking to them about what a wonderful fibre hemp was, and then they opened up the floor to some questions, and of course I got one 12-year-old saying, "Can you smoke it?" And I looked across at the headmaster and I looked back at the kid and went, "No, you can't smoke it." And I was able to explain to them the difference between what we were using and how you grow industrial hemp for its fibres. But yes, we used to get paid to grow hemp in the past. And I think Canada, when it lifted the legislation on the growth of hemp, the industry there absolutely boomed, and we've taken a bit longer in England. In fact, I think in terms of legal terms in England, we started to lift it before Canada, but we didn't typically follow through quickly enough, and we're still playing catch up. And there are all sorts of regulations that farmers worry about, that they have to comply with. But ultimately, farmers are very used to filling in lots of paperwork. It's just another piece of paper. And I think that the fact that it can, if you get it right, the growing conditions, you can have 2 harvests of hemp a year. It could offer a very good, strong economic model for a farmer who's maybe at the moment growing oats and barley, and it regenerates the soil. And it's going back to what an earlier talker was speaking about at the previous talk here, about the importance of regenerating the soil and how farmers would have once grown many multiple crops. You wouldn't have had a farmer that only specialised in barley and a farmer that only specialised in something else. So I think that's part of why it's changing. And that I think we're kind of starting to understand and think about what things are made of, finally. And hemp offers an excellent alternative. And it's a strong fibre. Maybe not as strong as your leather, but I have to say that because I'm sitting next to you. But it's got huge advantages.
And a material that can be grown in the UK.
Yes, in the UK, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think your point about people understanding now about what things are made of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really important. I think it goes back to the fundamentals of making anything and designing anything. You start with the materials, your material choice. And that's that influences the design so much.
Yeah.
Once you've established the materials, then you can start building around. You can start designing around those materials.
Yeah.
And that's
So to elaborate on that, Bill, you've had a really fascinating project recently at the Knepp Estate in Sussex.
Yeah, that was.
Could you tell us
we've
a
been
little bit more
doing
about that, because that kind of really gets to the heart of this kind of, can we really design with localism in mind, and what are the outputs of that? What can you tell us more about the products that you created and how they become a little bit more unique?
Well, the one that's actually currently on the market now, we did all within a chair called the Sellwood Chair, and here we are in Selwood Forest. We just designed a chair for the New Craftsman, which is an organisation in London, and we've that has all been made probably in 10 miles of here. And Jim here from the timber frame company is here. Rupert I can't see, but Rupert from Land Logic, who has a timber yard here. And so we designed a piece of furniture trying to avoid the waste that you get in furniture. So using wood that is not conventionally used in timber. So we've taken Douglas fir from here, from this estate, where they've got some really beautiful tree trunks. We've planked those tree trunks at Land Logic in the most economic way possible, so that they're planked as close to the finished item that we're trying to make, so we're not having to plane them down. We're keeping as much of the wood as possible, so no 2 chairs will be the same. They'll be made up of planks of wood according to the boards that come out of the logs. This is all Jim's encouragement and development and skill. And then we're using the fibres, this wool waste fibre to fill. We're using a tannery in Bristol to tan the leathers, which are all, again, UK produced animals. And it will produce it's a very beautiful, very comfortable chair, kind of goes without saying. But as a project, as a concept, it's been really interesting to really make something entirely locally that I think will, last, I hope, for generations. It's a sort of piece of furniture that will become an heirloom.
So you've moved away from the need to create a perfect piece of furniture which is identical to the next.
Yeah.
And you've kind of celebrated that through the materials.
Really important. Really important.
And I guess that must reduce the waste that's associated with the manufacture of each chair.
Yeah. I mean, the waste of the chair, literally the waste of the wood from the boards filled a tiny little basket like that. And very little shaving down, very little. I mean, you can't believe how much of a tree trunk. I mean, we're doing another project which is incredibly wasteful, and it's awful. I mean, they're literally tree trunks in the yard, and what we ended up with was some beautiful oak boxes, but most of it actually went in taking that tree trunk down and shaving it down and preparing the boards and losing so much of the actual wood. It made me think that's insanity. And what we've done with Jim is we're going to use the whole tree virtually. I mean, literally only the bits where you get heart shake right next to the middle and right on the edge where you get the sapwood. But the whole board is going to be used, and the tray will be made up from the boards.
So, Paul, Bill's Sellwood Chair sounds fantastic
Sure.
and completely aspirational. I'm sure any of the designers here would want to be kind of adopting this idea of a hyper-locally crafted, made, inspired chair. But, I mean, how realistic is that? I mean, you've been in the furniture industry for some time.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would be something you'd want to do,
Yeah.
but, I mean, can we really do that in an industry that's already quite globalised?
Yeah, I mean, some things are possible. I mean, this chair, as I said, is made in UK, albeit not entirely from UK timber. I mean, things like waste are critical. When we design, we know the board's thicknesses that we work with, so we already take into account, how, trees are planked, and because yes, whatever you waste costs money. So efficiency in the industry is critical. But I think we maximize where we can local production. Where we produce overseas, we again try to maximize localization to that factory. So we are engaged we're launching a new workbench table next month, which is made out of eucalyptus wood, which grows local to the factory in Portugal where the table is being manufactured. It can be harvested at 10 years, so it grows very quickly. And we're combining that with a recycled plastic top in the UK, which comes from a yogurt pot waste stream, and it's produced by a firm called Smile Plastics based out in Wales. And that is designed for disassembly, so that top comes off entirely, can be fully recycled into a new product. And it's accessorized with wool felt screen dividers, so you don't see people sitting opposite you, and cork tabletop accessories. So that's a kind of a hybrid of local to the factory, local to this main point of marketing or selling, which is the UK. But we always look. We continually price products in the UK. During the pandemic, when a lot of these sort of suppliers were having difficulties with staff not coming into work, and lead times getting very long and so forth, we set out sort of a call to suppliers in the UK to say, we need more resilience in our supply network or supply chain, and can you make, and a lot of people did contact us, say, we have spare capacity, our projects have stalled, we'd love to make for you. And we probably went through, 10 or 12 different workshops that had them priced 3 items, a large table, a mid-sized desk, and something else. And, we just couldn't make it work. We just could not make it work.
Financially.
Financially, and we as a company that likes to minimize waste in all respects, including batch production. We work in either very flexibly, so we have small batches or we make one-offs. We don't want to store tens of chairs or tables in a warehouse hoping to sell them, and so we make predominantly to order, and that flexibility is really, really important. So when we get drawn in, plus also question of economics and capital and size and cash flow, but so we can't get drawn into making it work by producing 100 or something, because it doesn't suit us. So we are wedded to, let's say, maximizing. If you like localism, depending on where we produce. I suspect the Sellwood Chair is a bit pricey because also the Craftsman, which is a wonderful organization and shop, and they're sort of neighbours to us in London, and what they do is fantastic. So we're the biggest fans. But it comes with a certain price point, and which is fine. We try to, as much as we can, which is not always easy, to price as fairly as we can. And we still are very expensive to most people. Yesterday, and I was telling this to Sam earlier. The person who helped me set up the stand, who I've known for 20 years, he sort of works in garden structures, and and sort of so off we work. It's like so you're not the only one selling overpriced furniture around here, are you? And I was like, whoa, what? Yeah, what, Alex? What? It took me totally by surprise, and it's like, well, it's not overpriced. I mean, this probably costs nearly £200 to make. That's what I buy these chairs at from the maker. But it's an expensive piece of furniture. So back to the point about also aspiring to scale, in the right way, not for the sake of being bigger, but really of being able to make greater impact. And price comes into that. And again, at different levels. And but anytime we step out of our comfort zone and we work with bigger high street players, every single time, the noble aspirations of making sustainably and falls by the wayside when price comes into play. And so I remind myself all the time, it's all well and good, to do what we do, but we're tiny. We're tiny, 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 tiny. And the problems are big, they're huge, they're massive. So, and price is a part of that.
But I think these are notions of value, aren't they? What you're talking about is actually value, not price. And I think that's what's interesting, is that how do you, what is value? What do people value? What do you guys value? What do you consider to be worthwhile? And therefore, what are you prepared to spend money on?
No,
that goes for food, it goes for transport, it goes for furniture, it goes for everything.
I think we're totally in agreement on that. It's just a question of whether enough people have that sense of value or share that value, and we even try to offer installment payments, we try to make it easier for people to acquire. If they appreciate what they're buying and want to buy it and wanting to pay it over 12 months, we enable that and we finance that, or we pay for that financing. So, we try to enable the sense of appreciation that they might have. And just more talking about sort of, on a greater level, whether enough people value the things that need to be valued, I guess.
So with that in mind, Sam, can I come back to you and your theatre
Can I just
background?
interrupt, because I've got a money spider on my finger and I need to just put it on.
There
you go.
Short nature.
There you are.
Enhanced break.
I couldn't really stamp on it, could I?
No, that would be wrong.
Not here.
No.
Sam, with
Yes.
your theatre background, obviously there's a lot of conversation about value, and whether that's financial value or environmental value, or the stories wrapped up in the manufacturing and the impact. What role does storytelling play in convincing people to spend a little bit more on something that is maybe unique or maybe more hard-wearing, becomes an heirloom furniture? How convincing can a good story be?
I think it's really important, and I think I can't remember if we were talking earlier or now about education. We do a lot of work in educating and informing people, and unless you can wrap that up in a nice, easy to understand story, you could have the most brilliant idea, but if you can't frame it in a way that's attractive to other people, then it may well fall on deaf ears. We were talking about that earlier, about how you convey. And I think that, yes, I guess the background that I have in theatre has taught me on a very basic level that all theatre is about is telling a story to the best ability you can to one bunch of people looking in one direction, at another bunch of people looking in the other direction. But if you get it wrong, it's a disaster. And I think I've spent my main focus when we first started Cecence was really trying to explain the philosophy, which hopefully I did at the beginning, about de-skilling and making composite manufacturing something that's understandable, kind of getting rid of it as some kind of dark art for which you could charge a higher price because nobody knew quite how you were doing it. And just exploding those kind of preconceptions, I guess.
I mean, in my own world, I found that when you engage people with conversations around carbon footprints and sustainability, it's enormously difficult. People are like, but who knows how big 1 ton of CO2 is? Yeah. Really. I do, actually.
Yeah.
How big is it?
It's a cube. Right. Glad you asked. It's a cube of 7 meters by 7 meters by 7 meters, which is pretty big. That's at sea level at sort of standard temperature.
That's pretty cool.
It's big, isn't it?
That's what 50 degrees C.
Yeah, but it's really difficult to engage with those sorts of sustainability conversations.
I see a sculpture part coming up. I see lots of cubes.
That's why looking at hemp is quite a neat way of answering that question, because it sequesters CO2 in its growth, and I think people can have that as a very clear visual. Everything now is starting to, well, not everything, but many products are now starting to have environmental product declarations with them. And so I think we might still need to kind of preach to maybe the bankers and explain to them why it's important that they should invest in sustainable materials. But the next generation, the younger generation, already get it. They don't need me to tell them a story about it, to frame it. They understand exactly what's going on and what they need to do. And I think we need to do a bit more listening to them, and that might help.
Yeah. The other route, of course, is that whilst people may not take on board the impact of a ton of CO2, they will understand the impact on their own well-being and health. And I
Yes.
think when we engage people in those very motivational, personal subjects, then, here's a chair, it's going to poison your home,
Yeah, no,
and it's
absolutely.
going to fall apart, and you might fall off it and hurt your back. Then people's health and well-being is a really fantastic and I think really important motivator.
I think so, yeah.
Very-
Healthy
in a very
buildings.
emotive subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are sort of drawing to the end of our speaking time. Just kind of within your sphere of influence, because you're all going to be connected with people and organisations doing different things, can you just tell me a company or an organisation or a product that is doing really interesting things in the world of products, materials and furniture design that's maybe not your own?
Well, I mean, even what Cecence is doing, and even working with wild cattle hides that come from rewilding projects in the UK, I think these are really interesting things. Biome and sort of mycelium from installation.
Yeah, the biome are fascinating.
Yeah, right. Packaging, natural materials, that Natural Mat has championed for years. Natural fibers that Bill was showing. All these types of products that can supplant the use of foam, for example, is a critical thing. Doing away with fire retardants in man-made materials would be an amazing thing for the health, the quality of the air in your home. So I think materials generally, particularly nature-based, I think are the future. And I think we, in case embracing plastic is really unusual for us, but actually it makes sense from a circularity point of view, and it's obviously post-consumer. We would never use virgin plastic, but so I think thinking outside the box, thinking about prioritizing, what it is we need to deal with and in which sector. But I think generally I get very excited about R&D in materials, and we're always keen to try and use them. So, although we're big champions of woods and natural materials that way, we love all the things that we discover in even places like this.
Yeah, Sam.
Yes, well, Margent Farm, who I mentioned earlier, are doing amazing work, particularly from an educational point of view about the importance of natural fibres and particularly hemp. There's a new company that's being formed called Hemp, which acts as a kind of collective where they're bringing together farmers, architects, designers, and putting everyone effectively around a round table and working together to interconnect. And I think that we've both been to the same factory that makes the felt material, and yes, we can give them a shout out. I think.
Yeah, totally.
Edward Clay, and they're based in East Yorkshire. They've been around for generations. When you go into their factory, there's a wonderful old portrait of great grandfather Clay, and he's there overseeing the production. And the interesting thing about that is they've been working with old bits of clothing, making a shoddy material that's typically used for a mattress covering, but they're now they've taken on using wool to make a felt product, and there's a huge potential. And one of the fun things that I found working in new materials isn't just following some kind of linear pattern where we only focus in on our particular area of development, but kind of meetings like this where we all learn from each other and we all understand each other's, and we together, I know it sounds corny, but together, yes, I've said it, we achieve more.
Yay.
Well, a company that I'm fascinated by at the moment are called Bash Studios, and they're based in Park Royal in London, and they are taking waste from around Park Royal, and Park Royal is the biggest industrial area in the UK, in Europe even, in fact. But they're taking waste from that area, they're grinding it up into a powder. They're then turning that into a porridge, and with the porridge they're adding a mycelium, like a fungus. They're then putting that into an enormous rapid prototyping machine, which they built. And they started out building small elements, but they are now taking that into an architectural scale. So they're building for Park Royal Design District. In September, they're going to build an actual architectural structure out of this waste-grown material. So when it sets, the fungus starts to grow and becomes hard and creates a kind of a formed concrete. It's just extraordinary. The potential of it is just absolutely magnificent. Their idea is that they will sell these machines and take these machines and give them to companies that produce lots of waste, so that from their waste they can
Great.
regenerate an entirely new material that has lots of different potentials for moulding or building or all kinds of things.
And that forms as a solid material? Doesn't
Forms
grow
as a
anymore
solid
on one
material,
set?
yeah, forms as a solid
The
material.
Fungi
mycelium
are the
basically
future.
just sets.
Yeah.
And the mycelium is the sort of active enzyme in there that makes it
Creates
all
the
hard.
structure.
But it's fabulous. They're Bash Studios, they're called. They're well worth checking out.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. We've got 10 minutes left now. So I'd like to ask if anybody in the audience has some questions. I've got Bex over here with a roving microphone. So if anybody has a question, the lady who's been our kind assistant gets the first call on the question.
Thanks. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. And I just wanted to kind of touch back on a point that you briefly talked about value. And I'd kind of like to revisit it slightly as well. Design is like a vehicle for values, I think. And we experience the values of the designer in the beautiful things that you make, and we get to understand a lot more about the potential of the world that we can live in through your amazing products. And you rightly mentioned that a lot of the products are really kind of inaccessible often in terms of their prices. So all the products with the best values behind them and that are the most valuable are the least accessible quite often. And I wonder, it's kind of a really open question to all of you, really, like, what can we do? We talk about people investing their own money, but like in these things, but it's often not a possibility for lots of people to do that. And so, and a lot of these people often experience bad values through the design that they're presented with, with food or with furniture and all these kinds of things. I just wondered whether there's other ways we might think about that beyond kind of having the consumer level having to spend more and take the burden of that. Have you had any thoughts about those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. I think to me it goes at the heart of a lot of the problems that we need to address this, because people need to have the opportunity of living well or better, as they can afford it. There's no point making things, as you say, inaccessible. When it comes to production and manufacture, often it's just obviously the labor input cost, the material cost, and often it's the amount you produce. If you produce a bigger batches, there's a lower unit cost, and so it is. I will say, if you look at what IKEA does these days, they've really improved immensely in terms of their own, sort of CSR programs and the sustainability credentials. And so I really go back to the point that I think scale is everything. We're not of the scale where we can affect change that way, but I think I see our role is sort of be those who sort of help pioneer certain ideas and hopefully get picked up by bigger players. We've been working with a large high street name for 2 years. They just canned the project, which is really pleasant and frustrating. But there was an opportunity that I'd hoped for, which is doing what we have done since our founding 12 years ago, and expressing our value through design and our communication and a narrative, then get picked up and work for a much, very big UK player and help them create and design a collection and then make it and help them produce it at an affordable price point to the consumer, which has all the values we talked about. It was carbon neutral. We were able to repurpose all the packaging within their supply chain. FSC timber, we also pioneered recycled foam, which is just starting to happen. Not that we are users of foam, but we obviously listen and see what is happening in that market. And we also had designed what would have been the first foam-free high street sofa made in the UK. So I think that to me is part of the answer to your question. Is enabling the bigger players to change, and to lead change, and through the help of smaller designer makers who are pushing the envelope and coming up with interesting ideas, and hopefully then have someone scale it up and then allow consumers to access it, according to their means.
I think there's also elements about a kind of how the economy is structured at the moment that is slightly corrupted, I think, and I think that has to change. People need to rethink how they get to food, rethink how they travel. there's an organisation called ECHO, which is quite interesting, where you trade skills. Now that seems to me, bartering skills seems to be a really sensible idea. In terms of what your question about value, I am highly skilled at leatherwork. I know I can make anything in leather, basically. And a lot of people can't, so I can easily swap that skill. I'm not a solicitor, I can't write. So I can swap that skill with people who can write. I can swap that skill, and that's the way I think that there's something in that I think is exciting, where people can, if there's more platforms where you can interchange skills and money's not really involved, that's got to be a good thing. Much more resonant as well, much more local, and it sort of, that kind of thing feels to me to have, more greater sense to it.
I think it is changing. Those business models are adapting. My middle daughter has an upcycling company called Reconsidered, and the reason she started that was because she wanted to be able to make sustainable clothing that could be sold to somebody in a way that was affordable in some way. It wasn't just going to be confined to a sustainable pop-up on the King's Road. And she's doing that. It's a hard journey for her, but she's absolutely committed to that. And I think you were saying that you can pay for things in installments. There are lots of different ways in which people can maybe buy something that is of a better quality, that's more sustainably sourced, and find a way to purchase that by breaking up a more traditional economic model.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question.
Hi, I'm Jim Blackburn. I'm working with Bill at the minute. I think one of the things that we need to face up to are some really uncomfortable facts and truths, and that, from my point of view, the really fascinating process that Bill and I are going through at the moment is actually not exactly winding the clock back, but reinvestigating locality and kind of unstitching the normal practice of quality, price and speed. And so in so doing, we've taken 8 weeks to produce a chair, and there's been various things that have worked and haven't worked, but I think going back over the same kind of learning principles again and again is useful. But when you think about chairs and design, for example, it used to be regional and it used to be non-global to a point whereby, go back less than 100 years and most people couldn't afford a well-made piece of craftsman-made furniture, and that was kind of okay, and people who are aspirational to have a craftsman-made piece of furniture would save up their hard-earned money, and at some point they would buy a piece, either new or second-hand, and then that would be passed on and treasured throughout the family. Now, how sustainable is that, where you get a piece of furniture that's treasured and loved, that lasts more than a generation or more than a fashionable couple of months before it's put in a skip? So, at the minute we're beginning to face up to some really nasty truths about globalisation and capitalism and consumerism. And, I don't have all the answers, or any even really, but I find it slightly perturbing. I still don't quite understand why this talk was named Design for Nature. What does that mean? We're not talking about design for nature, we're talking about design for profit, for earning money. And let's not confuse the thing, really. There was an old man called Philip Clisset who lived nearly 100 years, and he lived near Herefordshire, and he was a chair maker. And he got all of the ash for his chairs from within 5 miles, and he cut the rushes for the seats from the river, and he got a visit from Mr. Jimson, who was one of the lead architects, who had a private income from his industrialist father. And as a very high-level arts and crafts person, he was on a mission, and he could afford to be on a mission because he had private income. And he took that chair design and he improved it as an architect, and they're now mostly all of the Craft Council's chairs are made either by Clisset or by Jimson or his company. And Mr. Clisset made just about a living, and the price point from the same chair that was then made by Mr. Jimson was probably about 100 times the amount, but the value had changed because it had skipped up 3 classes. So, you know, the whole process is an interesting one, you know, where we take a common product. I mean, you know, go back 300...
Is there a question mark at the end of this? I'm just going to... If there is, great, but we're just going to move on to another question. Can you summarise it?
There is no summary to be had.
Oh,
I
okay.
think. I don't understand why this is called what it's called, this tool. Perhaps you could tell me.
Okay. Oh, I mean, I think it was an attempt to kind of rethink the materials and furniture system and how we might design more with nature in mind as opposed to profit. Okay. Another question. The lady down here.
Thank you. Firstly, thanks for all the information you've imparted today. It's been really interesting. I was really excited actually to hear, Samantha, you mention about hemp and hemp as a product. And I'm really interested in the availability of hemp as a textile because I know it can be used in that format in the UK because obviously that opens it up to being used in interiors and design much more widely. But I know, it's really hard to get your hands on here in the UK. I've heard of Mardant Farm and I spoke to them briefly about it, and even they say that it's not necessarily possible as a textile at the moment here. So I just wondered whether you see that being a possibility to have hemp more widely available as a textile in the UK in the near future.
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
I do, but yes, you're quite right. It's possible to make it into a felt relatively easily at the moment in the United Kingdom. But we've basically lost a lot of the machinery, and spinning hemp is a lot harder than spinning flax because it's a much tougher material. And we've lost that ability. One of the reasons I was so excited to meet a woman the other day called Deborah from Fibre Shed is that she was working with someone who was spinning hemp, but they were part of a university project and it all sort of fell apart. And the minute she said it to me, I was like, who is it? Who is it? What's their number? So we're going to talk about that, because one of the useful things about having it as a woven cloth is obviously we can harness the fibre, which in itself is already strong, but we can use it for more structural purposes in the same way as you might use a piece of woven glass or carbon fibre, but obviously better, we think. So yes, we need to do something about reviving. Not just in a museum somewhere where you learn this is how they used to spin hemp, but actually start building machines. And we've got the opportunity to build maybe better machines now and feed in some of the technological advances. So yeah, I'm absolutely. We should talk later. Okay, all right.
By the way, I can just make a quick comment about the gentleman and consumer behavior and change. I think it's a super valid point generally. But it's a really big thing to affect change that way. I think one way to cut through some of this and to maybe affect change is looking at the carbon tax on what we consume.
Yeah.
You know, and charging people, or charging anyone for that matter, relative to how something is made, where it is made, how long it may last, and finding a way to codify this so that the things that are the cheapest, you know, are made in a way that they won't last by default. Have a higher carbon tax than something that maybe is literally made, you know, within a 5-mile radius or something. And I think you know, to affect change also on the consumer behavior front is a really difficult topic. And when I've read about anyone trying to bring lots of stakeholders to a table for these things, they often come at it from a sort of the point of view of a psychologist and you know, nudging behavior change and understanding what they perceived needs are, whatever you may think of them, and saying, you know, how can we affect change whilst you feeling part of the process. But I think it's, you know, it's fundamental to how we live and consume, but how to change that is a big thing. But one way maybe I'm just suggesting this to cut through some of this is to say, well, we're going to tax things with a carbon tax, and it will drive, I think, consumer behavior more than one would probably think.
And possibly, sorry, Oliver, very quickly, possibly one of the ways of also challenging this is to do what you guys are doing, which is to be genuinely working together and not be so reliant on a financier or a private equity investor to grow the company, because they will inevitably be thinking in terms of a 5-year return on their investment, which stymies your creativity and isn't part of a longer-term program, which inevitably it has to be for the kind of work that we're doing.
We are running out of time. Lady in the green. Oh, we've got 2 people here. Okay, just a quick question, and then I'll come to you. Okay, go ahead. Oh, hang on a sec. Microphone's on its way. Don't want to miss this.
Mine is, I think you'll all enjoy it, is I don't know whether any of you have looked at the price of coffins today.
No.
And then if you add the eco costs of coffins, it's phenomenal, because there's plastic, there's brass, there's all sorts of things in them. The paints even that they use on the coffins are horrendously costly when it comes to the environment. So what we've done is we've taken tree bark, okay, and we can make a coffin of tree bark. I've also been in touch with people in Spain, because the cork industry is really under threat. Cork industry means trees, and one of the most valuable ecosystems in Europe. The Hesse and the Extremadura with the cork oaks and the animals and the birds and everything. So we're quite interested now in trying to get the Spaniards interested, and the Portuguese, in making cork coffins, tree bark. And it would be mostly oak, by the way. So if you're stripping oak, there's a chance you could make a coffin of it. And of course, when you get to my age, you get quite interested in it.
Thank you. Okay, final question from Lady in Green.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panel. Really enjoyed it today. Just to the lady at the front, I work for a mill in Yorkshire, which is we produce hemp fabric. So
Great.
perhaps we should.
Wow, finally!
So I've got a card here that I could give you afterwards if you want. But okay, thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay, so that's more or less it. Just one final kind of statement from each of you. If you could give some advice to the audience to how they could change their consumer habits. They have power. They can be doing something. They can be contributing to this idea of manufacturing and the materials that are used. What would that advice be? What one thing would you advise the audience members to do? Bill.
I think make things yourself. Pick up some tools and learn to use some tools. Then it's pretty much every hand tool is relatively straightforward, and provided you don't cut your fingers off, you can have a good time with them, and you can make some interesting stuff. It doesn't matter whether it's knitting or whatever it can be. You can make stuff. Making stuff is good fun.
It really does help you put a sense of value onto an object. Yeah.
Make your own coffin.
Make your own coffin.
I've actually got the leather for my own coffin. I've got it.
It's a wrap.
It's on the shelf. One of these days I'm going to make my coffin. But I identified the leather that I'm going to make my own coffin out of. That's for sure.
Good.
I think
Sam, anything more?
Yeah, I think the next time you're looking at something and you're thinking about purchasing it, really start to think about what it's made out of and what the journey was between its starting point and where it's ended up.
I just say, buy the best you can and buy less, and tax yourself. Give yourself a carbon ceiling, and then work within that and say no to things just because you set yourself a ceiling. So, you might travel less, you may buy less, you buy better, you buy one and then wait a year. Just a way perhaps to give yourself some parameters.
Right. Okay. Well, firstly, I would like you to ask you all to give a big hand to our panel.
Thank you.
Paul, Sam, and Bill. And also thank you to Planted Country for bringing them here, and to the National Trust for hosting us, and to our cabin makers out of the valley. If you want to know more about Out of the Valley, there's some kind of lovely leaflets in there that you can pick up. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure.